Today I'm making ramekins. They have a tab for your thumb and a matching plate, but the highlight will be the clay. I need a clay that's warm and textured, so I'm going to blend my own. I'm also going to show you an important detail when adding that thumb tab. I'm using my yellow speckle clay and adding some of this beautifully smooth mahogany clay. I'm using a half-half blend. So mixing clay together is a bit of cutting, slamming, smishing and wedging. Getting the two well blended is a matter of elbow grease. So you can mix different clays together to get the characteristics you like, and that's the point. You can customize the clay you're using without having to keep another clay. Technical considerations when mixing clay are firing temperature and shrinkage. So the firing temperature may change and the shrinkage rate may be important if you're like me and you don't quite blend as thoroughly as you should. Both of my clays fire to a cone 6. So now I have my clay mixed, I'm going to make the ramekin. I start by centering 700 grams of the clay. So this is really a square-sided bowl that's a little rounded at the base. So the combination of clay here is really nice to work with. So as I center here, remember to subscribe, comment and like if you enjoy our videos. It's always really encouraging. And then I flatten the clay to about 140 millimeters or 14 centimeters. And now I can push down into the clay, leaving about 10 mil in the base. And I open out flat across the base, and I leave a curve where the walls meet the base. Now I can start to form the walls. So I pull the walls up, making sure I don't thin the rim too much. If the rim is too thin, it won't support the tab without misshaping. And now I pull the wall up to the full 70 millimeters. I straighten the sides. And then I trim around the base. As I trim, I curve the base to match the interior curve. And I finish by smoothing with a rib. I wire through and set aside to dry to not quite leather hard. Now I'm ready to make the plate. I take the 800 grams and I center. From a making point of view, I'm really happy with the blend so far. This is a simple way to adjust your clay body for your needs. I flatten the clay to 220 mil diameter or 22 centimeters. I push down into the clay, leaving 10 millimeters in the base. So I'm not pushing down very far. And I open out. This makes a really simple contemporary plate. And as always with plates, I can press. So this plate's almost like a tray. I bring the walls up to about 20 mil. And I'm going to compress with a rib again, just making sure the plate is flat. I trim around the base, and like the ramekin bowl, I'm creating a curve. I wire through and set aside to dry to leather hard. So I'm going to make the tab. I take the remaining clay and I roll it. I use 2 strips of wood to get the thickness, and then I measure out a strip of clay 45 mil wide. I cut a circle with a circle cutter to fit the profile of the ramekin, and with a smaller circle cutter I cut to round the end of the tab. The tab's about 40 mil. So I'm ready to add the handle. For some reason I feel like adding the handle before I trim. Actually, I think it's because I like to add the handle while the clay's still a little damp. So as I add the handle, the base of the ramekin will dry and will be perfect for trimming. In a roundabout way, it actually makes sense. I've marked out where the handle is to go on the ramekin, right at the rim. I've scored both surfaces, the ramekin body and the handle, and now I've added some slip and I press. I smooth together. And then I add a coil of clay. Now this slug of clay is important, as well as creating a good solid join. It adds a rounded curve perfect for your fingers or thumb. So I smooth this to both the body and the tab. This is a detail that will make the ramekin really nice to use. And now I'm ready to flip the ramekin. I'm going to add a small coil of clay to the handle where it meets the rim. And then there's some smoothing to do. Now I trim the ramekin. I center and attach, taking care around the handle. And then I trim across the base. I trim around the foot, matching the inside curve. And then after a little more trimming across the base, I smooth with a rib. Now I can set aside to dry fully. It's time to trim the plate. So now I can see where my blending didn't quite hit the mark. Not that I mind the marbling, but it's not quite what I was after. The bottom of plates tends to show this kind of marbling. So I've centered, and now I attach my plate with lugs of clay. So to trim, I'm just rounding the foot of the plate. And then I trim across the base. And once I've trimmed, I smooth. I use my rib across the base of the pot to compress. And I set aside to dry. I bisque fire and then I glaze. And glaze fire. So I've glazed with my functional white glaze on the interior and on the rims. Now, I know some potters feel a little uncomfortable without glaze on the exterior of a piece. It might just be personal preference. For me, I really like the contrast between clay and glaze. And if I've put effort into making a clay blend, I want to appreciate it in both its look and feel. And that tab with the rounded join, well, that feels complete. If you want more cozy bowls, check out these rounded bowls. And as always, happy potting.